Hello and welcome back to another episode of the podcast Little Girls Aren't Taught This. How are you lovely lot doing on this wonderful Sunday? It's Father's Day, which is really nice. So I am spending the day with my dad and my granddad and just chilling out. And yeah, I just thought I'd open the episode with a little check-in. How are you today? How are you feeling? How is your mental health? And we today are actually going to do an episode around anxiety. And I'm going to share some tips and some tools of ways that you can start to manage your anxiety. And obviously, given that I am self-love Lydia, I'm going to link it into self-love. So this is a really interesting episode for me because anxiety is something that obviously I experience, but I experience it more when something is happening in my life where I feel out of control. I don't tend to get day-to-day anxieties. However, I know a lot of people do, hence my intention to do this episode. So yeah, this episode is something I put like a lot of research into and just really took my time to like feel into what it is that I want to talk about. So welcome to this week's episode. For those who are new here, I am Lydia, self-love coach and mentor to women across the world, qualified creative, trauma-informed psychotherapist, and my mission is to help as many women as I can cultivate a deep self-love and return home to their bodies. So before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that my spaces for Bali, I am hosting a 2024 self-love retreat in Bali. Now, when I say big move for me, oh my God, edgy as fuck. Like, absolutely shitting myself. But I actually had someone sign up this week before the spaces even got released, which is just mind-blowing for me. So I am hosting it in Bali next year. All-inclusive 7-day self-love retreat in this little secret sacred oasis in Ubud. So if you are interested, get yourself on the wait list. Spots are dropping tomorrow. All you have to do is secure your spot with a deposit, and then the 12-month or 10-month payment plans start from July. So I'm just putting that out there, and then we're going to jump into the episode. So this week, like I said, we're going to talk about anxiety. So I just want to open the episode talking a little bit around, what anxiety is and what healthy and unhealthy anxiety actually looks like. Because I think actually, so many people experience anxiety. So it's such a common, it's an emotion like any, and it's the same emotion like sadness, it's the same emotion like happiness. It's just a feeling that we feel within our body. However, I know some people can, have generalized anxiety disorders. Some people can have really debilitating anxiety. So I know that the spectrum in terms of like how people experience it is very different. But I just want to go into some ways that anxiety can be healthy and unhealthy. So it's a natural and normal human response, and it is a response to stress. I was actually reading something in one of my complex PTSD books yesterday, and it said something like anxiety is just fear below the surface. So what I interpreted that as is when our body feels something that it potentially perceives as a threat, there's fear there. However, we've not processed that fear, so it comes out as a bodily response of anxiety. Sometimes we're not really aware of what's making us anxious, so it's almost like that feeling that's not quite being brought into the consciousness, or something that we don't really understand is making us feel like there's a threat or fear. So I just thought that was interesting because I was reading that yesterday. And that really resonated for me. And I think that resonated more for when like my life was falling apart last year. All of the time, every single morning, I would wake up anxious. And I would wake up anxious because my intuition and my body was almost like making a decision around being in America. Like I knew that America wasn't for me. I knew that my mental health wasn't good over there. I knew that all of these different things, the relationship that I was in wasn't good for me at the time. And I was unable to process because I was very, very overwhelmed. So every single day I would literally wake up with like crippling anxiety, and I would go to sleep with crippling anxiety. And that just really resonated with me because it was the fear. It was the fear of the decisions. It was the fear of speaking my truth. It was the fear of acceptance of what like my body was guiding me to and what was coming up and what I really felt. So that yesterday reading, that just really resonated for me. So anxiety can become problematic when it becomes excessive, persistent, and starts interfering with a person's daily life. So again, we see this quite a lot, and we see this a lot post-COVID. You know, a lot of women that I speak to have a level of anxiety that stops them from doing the things that they would love to do. And a lot of this as well can be like coming to women's circles. You know, I have an ecstatic dance next Friday. Maybe you're listening to this and you really want to come to that, but your anxiety is making you feel like you can't go, and is then creating all of these stories as to why you shouldn't go. You know, are people going to look at you? Does it feel a big deal? Are you going to look silly? So there's many ways that actually our anxieties can play out and really start to interfere with our daily lives. A lot of us after COVID were like super anxious in social situations, even small little things like how much eye contact. Like I remember after coming out of COVID, I wasn't particularly anxious about it, but this was just an observation of mine. And I remember I'm somebody who likes to make eye contact. I'm someone who's very comfortable with like eye contact and looking at a person when I'm talking to them. And I remember thinking, what's too much eye contact now? Because I almost feel like I'm staring into the depth of your soul because I haven't had human contact for so long. And I remember just being very aware of that. And that was like really, it was actually quite funny, but it is, you know, I remember being in university with people and they would feel anxious about that. They would feel anxious around how do you relate in space to people now? How much do you look at a person? All of these things that we've done for so long, but all of a sudden it gave us like a social anxiety of how to be and relate and be in space with other people. And it's just super, super interesting. So healthy anxiety is normal levels of anxiety that everyone experiences from time to time. So this has actually got quite a proactive and a protective purpose. So because there's a part of anxiety that's natural, you know, when we link it back to that perceived threat, what we were talking about before, our anxiety is there to almost serve as a guidance system for things that are making us feel a threat or basically giving us a sign that there's something that we don't like. So it has a place. It is a good emotion. And it's something that helps us stay alert and focused when facing challenges or potentially dangerous situations. So healthy anxiety can also motivate us to prepare for exams, you know, make decisions that we want to make, meet deadlines, take certain precautions that we need to take to be safe. And it's usually a feeling that's quite temporary and it subsides quite quickly after that stressor has passed. So again, thinking about relating this to my experience of anxiety, as soon as I start to make decisions that are the cause of, like, almost like gain a little bit of control back, my anxiety will subside. So that example, what I just referenced then in America, you know, that for me was, once I started to speak my truth and make decisions, that anxiety subsided. Like I wasn't waking up and the first thing that I felt was anxiety. It was almost like that valve. It was like a blocked drain and the valve had been twisted and the pressure was releasing, meaning that anxiety was starting to subside. Also, anxiety is, you know, when you start to move through things or even pull away from things that seem like stressful situations, naturally when you have healthy anxiety, You will start to feel like your heart rate drop and your nervous system. This is as well something I noticed. So another big stressor for me with anxiety is spiders. I definitely have arachnophobia, like it's so bad. And I will literally, my body will be consumed in anxiety the moment I see a spider. Like, it's ridiculous. And I notice that my heart rate increases to like a bazillion beats per minute. And I get like sweaty. Like, the impact it has on my body is insane, because I unpack this in therapy, but this is like super funny and super cute and also like really annoying. Side note, my little like 5-year-old inner child thinks spiders are like death. So me now, as a 30-year-old grown-ass woman, still thinks spiders equal death, which is so funny and so dramatic, but like a real thing. I'm going to actually have hypnosis to go into it. Anyway, side note, I digress. But once I'm out of that situation, or once the spider has gone, you know, my anxiety will subside. So for you, healthy levels of anxiety are when you feel like you can gain control again, and when that anxiety does not consume you or actually stop you from doing things. So my anxiety with spiders becomes really unhealthy because it literally paralyzes me. Like, I cannot move. I'm getting a little bit better now, but if there's like actually I'm very much better, but if there's a spider on the stairs, I never even used to be able to walk past it. Like, my legs would not work to move to get me past that spider. Now I'm getting much better because I'm doing like slow levels of what's it called, exposure. So I am actually getting better. But that was almost like that's an example of where my anxiety was so unhealthy, to the point where it became debilitating. Now, if you relate this to your own experience, have you ever wanted to do anything and your anxiety has like physically stopped you? Like, you've wanted to go to the shops, or you've wanted to go out with your friends, or maybe you've wanted to go to a social event on your own, but your anxiety has stopped you. And there can be many, many causes, underlying causes for why your anxiety can become unhealthy and stop you from doing things. So this episode hopefully serves as a way where you can start to integrate some things to help you, spot where that unhealthy anxiety is and begin to like move through it in ways that feel good for you. I think also anxiety isn't a bad thing, and it's so normal when like you want to do well. You know, like if you're doing something that's new, if you're doing something where you're stepping out your comfort zone, you are going to have anxiety and you are going to have fear. Like, it's normal. However, again, that's like a healthy anxiety, because when you're stepping into something that you've never done before, of course there's going to be a part of you that feels fearful. You know, of course there's going to be a part of you that's protective. I actually sent something about this on my daily email today. But you're disrupting your zone of comfort, so of course you're going to feel that way. And I just almost think that that's a sign that you care. You know, like when I moved to America last year, I was so anxious about it. When I've done my master's, I was anxious about my deadlines. It's all normal, it's natural. So then we go into unhealthy anxiety. So unhealthy anxiety occurs when anxiety becomes overwhelming, and this is the thing, disproportionate to the situation at hand. So my anxiety around spiders is so disproportionate. It's not on a scale, it's not relevant to the perceived threat, and it literally overwhelms my whole body. So that's an example of where you can take that and make it relatable to an actual lived experience. So again, for you listening to this, is there any examples of that where you have that in your life? So it may persist even when the absence of the apparent threat causing the distress subsides. So, you know, you still feel unable to function effectively. You still feel in distress, even when that threat has gone. So again, this would be a problem if we link it back to the lived experience with the spiders. If I was still unable to come down from that anxiety, I was still unable to control my heart rate, you know, how my body was physically responding once that spider had been removed. That would be an example of when the anxiety continues to be very, very unhealthy. So unhealthy anxiety, often often manifest as anxiety disorders. So again, these are something very, very separate. As a psychotherapist, I am qualified to work with like general anxiety disorders, panic disorders, social anxiety disorders, all of these different things. However, for me, it's not my strong point. I think what's really crucial as like a psychotherapist is to understand what your strong points are, understand what you understand. That's really crucial for me. And in my training, I've had experience, even as a coach working with women with these types of anxiety disorders, I've had experience of it. However, I wouldn't say that I understand it enough to start going into these things. But one of the things I would say is that if you do struggle with things like this, when you're seeking support in terms of like a therapist or a coach, just ensuring that you have somebody who understands these specific things so they can help you through it. If you're looking to work with a coach around things, having a coach who, one, is qualified, for fuck's sake, to work in these types of things, but also who understands, is super, super important. Again, looking for a psychotherapist. If you was looking for a psychotherapist to help you with your anxiety disorder and you came to me, ethically, I would be like, I don't feel like I know enough, and I think you should find a therapist who is specialized or really, really understands anxiety disorders. So that's almost like a side note. It's a side note, an ethical side note as a psychotherapist, because I know that a lot of women listening to this podcast will eventually end up seeking support or want to seek support. And it's just really integral for me to like, over the process of things that I talk about and just on my journey as a psychotherapist and a coach, to just really, really guide you in ethical ways to find and support that is actually the level of support that you deserve. So that feels really important as a side note. So signs of unhealthy anxiety might include excessive worry, so constant intrusive and irrational worries about various aspects of life, such as work, health, relationships, or everyday situations. So again, I've seen this with clients, and I actually saw this a lot with my teenage clients that I was working with in my training. I was working with a lot of young girls between the ages of like 14 and 17, and a lot of them had this type of excessive anxiety where they were worried about a lot of things. And that was super interesting in my training as a psychotherapist, to work with that type of, thought pattern and thought process, because it really is a loop from my experience and my understanding. It really is a loop that plays out where everything is just a triggering thing for worrying. And the level of worry that those thought processes will go to was just super, super like interesting. And also, I almost thought, how exhausting must that be? Like, how consistently tiring must it be to have that level of worry in your life about everything and those levels of intrusive thoughts. So that's a sign of unhealthy anxiety. Another sign of unhealthy anxiety might be physical symptoms. So anxiety can also manifest as symptoms in the body. So rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, sweating, muscle tension, headaches, stomach ache. There's so many different ways that unhealthy anxiety can manifest in your body. Avoidance behaviours. So people with unhealthy anxiety might go to great lengths to avoid situations or places that trigger their anxiety, which can also lead to social isolation and disruption of their normal routine. So this is something that I see working with women with trauma. Again, when I've worked with trauma, one of the things that's interesting is women may come to me with like these unhealthy anxiety disorders, and it's actually, for me, it's always looking at it from the perception of the trauma. So it's interesting how I may have worked with women with these symptoms. However, when we unravel it, it's linked to the trauma. So obviously, if you've experienced something traumatic, you are going to avoid certain behaviors. Essentially, when you're in a flashback or you're in a trigger of trauma, you can have the physical symptoms, you can have literally be impaired. However, trauma can also manifest in these ways day to day, and you might not even know that it's linked to your trauma, but you may excessively worry. You may get physical symptoms. You definitely, there will be a part of you that will be avoidant of certain situations, which could lead to social anxiety. And the reason why this is massively linked to trauma is because your body is in fight or flight. So when that trauma is stored in your body, there's a receptor going off all the time that's super hyper vigilant to any perceived threat. So imagine the normal person, that part of their brain is always aware of perceived threat, but when you have experienced trauma, you're like hyper vigilant to that, which means that you're always out looking. You're always alert to any potential threat, which means that these symptoms of unhealthy anxiety, you may experience more so. Impaired functioning is another one. So anxiety can interfere with daily activities, work productivity, relationships, and overall quality of life. Again, something we massively see when we work with women with trauma. I don't know who we is, me. When I work with women with trauma, your ability to function naturally, function normally. Again, this is not something that is ever, I guess, like looked at as black and white. I think it takes working with somebody who has the knowledge and the experience of trauma to begin to notice these things. But actually, after you experience trauma, so how it's explained is, I've just been reading this morning, the body keeps the score, but almost like you have your life on a timeline. You have the moment that you experience trauma. There's almost like a glitch in your timeline, and then life continues. So it's really interesting that for you, if you've experienced trauma, and again, every single person is different, but it's almost like there was the before and there was the after. Now with the after, part of experiencing trauma is, there's something within your brain that wants to just block out what happened. There's a part of you, we've spoke about disassociation, we spoke about disconnection, the bodily function that happens with trauma. However, if we look at it from a cognitive perspective, there's a part of your mind that wants to block out that experience. And that in that blocking out, it almost just tries to resume life as normal. So for you, if you've experienced trauma, you may just try to be living life how you did before that traumatic experience happened. However, it's not the same. And the reason why it's not the same is because there's trauma within you. Something has happened that now has changed the functionality of your body and brain. Whether you're aware of that's happened, but within you, things have changed. So what that means is how you show up in your life, even if it feels like it's normal, it may not be the way that it was before you experienced the trauma, which means that there may be a level of impaired functioning. How you relate to people. Trauma has a massive impact on intimacy and connection. Whether that's around shame that you feel, whether that's around safety that you feel, how you relate to people who know about your trauma versus who don't know about your trauma, how you are able to relate to yourself. Again, I've just spoke about these avoidance behaviours that come forward from that. And I've actually worked with one of my first trauma client I worked with. She had massive anxiety attacks, never ever related it to the trauma that happened 10 years prior. She's actually done a podcast episode with me. Nikita, her name is. So if you're interested in that, go back and listen to it. It's really, really good episode. But she never linked the panic attacks to the trauma. And when we started working together, we unravelled that this anxiety was stemming from the trauma within her body. When we started to work through the trauma, those anxiety attacks subsided. But one of the things that was really interesting to observe was she would isolate almost in those moments where the anxiety got really, really overwhelming. And she wouldn't let people know how much she was struggling with the anxiety attacks. And she almost wanted to find a way to deal with that. There was moments where her family was involved, but some of the time she wouldn't tell anybody around her. Now that's an impact on how she's showing up in the world and she's relating to that's impacting her relationships. Now I have gone off a little bit and started speaking about trauma. However, it is really relevant. And I think the amount of women that have experienced trauma, the amount of my listeners that are going to listen to these podcast episodes who have potentially experienced trauma, if there's any way I can link my podcast episodes into some psychoeducation, into talking about trauma, into just making these topics almost relatable to other different areas where I can educate you, then I'm going to do that. Hence why I've just started to talk about trauma. Emotional distress is another unhealthy sign of anxiety. So experiencing unhealthy anxiety often feels really intense. It evokes a lot of fear, restlessness, irritability, and a sense of impending doom. Again, you see this a lot with trauma. And the reason that you see this a lot with trauma is because there's just that constant perceived threat within the body. You know, so much changes. Something can be a trigger that's so insignificant it can seem to other people, or even you on a conscious level. It can seem so insignificant. You may not even relate it to the trauma, and it can just release a level of rage or irritability in you that may seem like it's come from nowhere, but everything comes from somewhere. So when you have this unhealthy anxiety, again, if we remember, anxiety is just perceived threat. That's what it is. If you've experienced trauma and you're already hypervigilant, you're always thinking there's that perceived threat, and you've got the emotion in your body, and you've had the experience where you were under threat. So you have that experience where you have been vulnerable and something has happened to you. So that is just amplified so much more when your body has held on to trauma or you've experienced trauma. So again, anxiety is a normal experience. It's a normal emotion. And I think seeking support is really crucial if anxiety becomes overwhelming and significantly impacts your well-being and daily functioning. One of the things that I will say is, if you have been down the route, I've got dead leg. If you have been down the route where you've got support for your anxiety and you don't feel like anything's helping and you feel like there could potentially be trauma, one of the things I would suggest is, maybe doing some work around the trauma. Because what's really interesting when it comes to trauma work is there's no one size fits all. For me personally anyway, medication has a purpose. I'm not able to prescribe medication. Obviously, I'm a psychotherapist. However, I'm not one of these practitioners that completely dismisses medication. I think everything has a purpose. Every single person is different when it comes to healing their trauma. However, if you have been down that route of taking medication and you still feel like there's more work that you need to do, or it's not helping, or you don't feel anything in your body and you just feel quite flat in your life, and you potentially feel like you've experienced trauma, one of the things I would say is start looking potentially at doing some somatic work. Start looking at exploring the emotion that's in your body, because a lot of women I've worked with, their anxiety, when I've worked with trauma, one of the symptoms that they have is anxiety, and often it can be crippling anxiety. And then when you start to work through that emotion, it really does free up space within the body. And that safety, when you start to regulate your nervous system, what's actually happening is, again, I've done a podcast episode on this, you come back down into rest and digest, which means you essentially, your body and your nervous system starts to drop back into that green zone, that level of safety. When you drop back into that level of safety within your body, that anxiety is going to start to subside because it doesn't perceive that there's a threat. And again, this is huge for trauma. A lot of women are operating in amber red zones without realizing it, because of that hypervigilance. So what's really, really important for people who've experienced trauma is to work to reset the nervous system and drop you back down into that green zone. And the way that you do that is bringing you back home to your body and creating that level of safety, working through the trauma. When you process the trauma, when you work through trauma and you release that emotional charge from the body, and you also do that simultaneously with bringing your nervous system back down, you're going to reduce the level of anxiety that you have in your body because there's no longer that perceived threat. Ooh, that was a nice little intro. Not an intro, but that was a nice little section of the podcast. I actually love sometimes, side note, when I talk about trauma, you know, and I've just said all that and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so knowledgeable on trauma. And I love it. I love these little moments where I'm just in flow talking and it feels easy and it feels like I really know what I'm talking about, because yeah, I've really struggled with that identity part of feeling like I'm intelligent and I'm knowledgeable because of my dyslexia. Again, side note, but I just was like, oh, that was really nice to experience that little chat about trauma and anxiety then. Different causes and triggers of anxiety. Again, everybody is different, and I think everybody has their own experiences of things that cause them anxiety. But one of the things I wanted to go into in this episode to link it to self-love is how a lack of self-love or self-worth can significantly contribute to feelings of anxiety. So when you struggle with low self-esteem or a lack of self-worth, you often have negative beliefs about yourself and your abilities. So you may constantly doubt yourself, you may fear judgment or rejection, you may have a heightened sense of self-criticism, so you may see that come through with that inner critic. Again, just imagine the fear that you have of rejection or judgment. When we're talking about perceived threat for anxiety, that is a threat in a sense. Somebody judging you or rejecting you, that's a threat. So when we're talking about perceived threats, we're not just talking about stepping out into the road and getting hit by a car. You know, we're not talking about the same threats our ancestors would have where a lion would run through the jungle. We're talking about relevant threats to the 21st century. Now, judgment or rejection by our peers or people that we love is a threat. It evokes shame. It evokes in an abandonment. And that self-criticism is also something that's a threat. That inner critic constantly telling you that you're not good enough, you're not doing a good job, you're not doing it like everybody else. All of these things are ways that we as humans now have threats, and ways as well that we can almost fear ourselves. Like our own minds can create these threats. And when you doubt yourself, I think that's another thing that can really cause anxiety in people. So negative self-perceptions can create a constant state of anxiety. Again, if you think about rest and digest, green zone, if you have a regulated nervous system, there's a level of you that feels at peace. There's a level of you that feels safe. If you have a negative self-perception, there's no part of you that really will truly feel safe with self. You know, negative self-perceptions, if you look at it from the perception of body image, if you reject your body image and you don't like your body, to really drop down back into your nervous system and bring it into that green zone, you need to be in your body. Now, simple, I say simple because we're not talking about complex issues here of like eating disorders or trauma. So let's talk about it from the experience of just negative thought processes around your body. You know, the things that women as in general experience, the things that we all have growing up. Now, they're not normal, but I would define them as normal, and I did in my research because that many women experience them. However, the impact of those negative thought processes for years on end and, you know, the conditioning and diet culture and all of these different things, it means that women are very disconnected from their bodies. It means that women view their bodies as projects, something to refine, something to make perfect for the benefit of other people. We don't live our lives in our bodies. We live our lives with our bodies being objects for other people to judge and tell us are good enough. So if we imagine that for a moment, we imagine those layers and layers of criticism. Do you actually think it's possible for you to find the green zone for your nervous system and feel a level of peace, and to feel like there's no perceived threat when your thoughts essentially are a threat, because your thoughts are always keeping you on the edge. Even if you don't realize it, there's undercurrents that are happening energetically and emotionally when you're consistently every single day saying, oh, I don't like what I see in the mirror. Oh, I don't look good. Oh, I feel fat. Oh, I don't want to look at myself in the mirror. I want to cover my belly. Do any of these things sound like they're bringing you into the green zone? Or do you almost feel like you're consistently on edge because you're thinking about your body? You're consistently rejecting your body. So if we look at it that way, that's a way where we start to see how anxiety can also link to these subtleties in relation to body image, in relation to self-love, in relation to self-perception, and how actually that is a perceived threat, whether or not we've ever realized that. Because our mind is creating that threat. You're not good enough to go out in this world. You don't look how you should look. People are going to judge you. You are judging yourself. So I'm going to get into some ways that anxiety can almost come through if we're thinking about self-love, because I always like to make my episodes different. So I thought I would link it to self-love. So fear or failure of judgment. So when you have low self-worth, you may fear making mistakes or being judged by others. And this fear can lead to anxiety, such as social interactions, what we spoke about, work-related tasks, personal relationships. If you're fearful of failure or judgment, you're probably never going to come out your comfort zone if you let that control you. Which means you're never really going to see much change in your life. Which means you're probably going to be stuck in the same cycles that repeat out, with the same thought processes, around the same people, doing the same things. Now, whether or not you're aware of it, there's an inner voice within you, and there's a part of you that actually wants more. And I'm not even talking about this from like a spiritual perspective. Let's think about that inner child for a moment. Where does her essence and her energy and her joy go? Because she's in there, she's in you. So it's almost like, imagine that she's in the corner facing the wall with her head down and she can't come out. How do you think she's going to feel? Because she's told that she can't come out because she's feared people are going to judge. Can't be playful because people are going to judge me. I can't just sing and say stupid things because people are going to judge me. So it's almost like that essence of us, which lives in every single person, by the way. We're all just little children in adult bodies. Like, I'm 100% convinced that's my perspective on life. We're all just these little kids with all of our wounds, just walking around in these adult bodies trying to figure shit out, wondering when we lost the joy and the freedom of just being silly and being playful. So when we fear judgment or we fear failure, of course it's going to result in anxiety, isn't it? Because not only are you going up against that fear of stepping out your comfort zone in case it doesn't go right, or you're doing something different so people are going to judge you, but you're almost going up against yourself. Because if you don't step forward into that, there's a part of you that's just like, well, what about everything that we want? You know, that inner voice. I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be disconnected. And that's what she's telling you. But then if you're not doing anything to change that and listen to that internal voice, there's almost like that resistance from self, which can also cause anxiety. Almost like that lack of control. You know, control to make the decision to go forward because you fear the failure or the judgment. And then almost that lack of control to either silence that inner critic, silence that inner voice, or listen to that inner intuition and act on that. Constant self-criticism, spoke about this one, but again, negative self-talk and self-criticism can of course fuel anxiety. When you constantly berate yourself or believe that you're not good enough, anxiety can arise as a result of the pressure to meet the unrealistic expectations. So again, this is what I'm talking about. We create our own perceived threats. Our minds, our expectations create these modern day threats, and that's before we've even stepped out the fucking front door. Like, that's just us on our own in a room. And there's threat. And that threat is from the unrealistic expectations. The pressure to be the thing that we think that we need to be, instead of just being ourselves and accepting ourselves. Seeking external validation, another big one. When we have a lack of self-worth, we tie that to external validation. We seek approval and praise from others. We constantly worry about meeting other expectations. Again, fear of not being accepted or not being loved can generate anxiety in social situations. You know, a lack of self-love and a lack of self-worth is going to cause you to look to other people to fill your cup up. And when that happens, you know, there's always this underlying, like, anxious energy about you, because you're always trying to make other people happy, and it's fucking impossible to make everyone else happy. And then on top of that, again, like I've just said, you're going against yourself. So in order to make everybody else around you happy, you're depleting yourself. You're not filling your cup up. So these things cause anxiety. These things cause exhaustion. Perfectionism, another one. Low self-worth often contributes to perfectionism tendencies. You might strive for protection to compensate feelings of inadequacy. The feeling of not achieving can create anxiety and a constant need to control outcomes. So when you're striving to be perfect, again, it's like anxiety inducing, because no one's perfect. And actually, whose expectations are you living up to? And if you think yours, really just spend some time connecting to that and think, is it yours? Because something I always say is, like, the beliefs around our body that we have, they're not ours. We don't come into this world thinking, oh, I need to be like a size 8, I need to lose a stone, and then I'll be worthy. Oh, I need to go and get a BBL, I need to get my lips done. Like, it's absolute bullshit. We don't come into this world thinking that at all. Do you think our ancestors who were running wild woke up and were like, I don't even know what it is, but my lips need to be bigger? No, they never. Like, it's absolute bullshit. They're not ours. We pick them up along the way. We are like sponges as children. And when we grow up, we take all of this on. So these expectations, if you think that they're yours, I would just question, are they yours? Where have you, the things that you think, where have you heard that before? Where has someone said that to you? Where have you seen that? What made you believe that X, Y, and Z is what you need to achieve to be enough? And honestly, this is why when you work through self-love, a lot of anxiety goes, because these things are essentially what comes when you have self-love, the opposite of those. Negative self-image, which I've spoken about, but your perception of yourself, feeling unworthy of love and acceptance, can lead to anxiety in intimate relationships, because you are constantly going to be attaching to people in an anxious manner. You are going to be forming your connection and your bonds with people with that underlying anxiety that they could potentially leave you. So when that happens, there's always that need to find control, question, do everything to be good enough. If you don't know about your attachment styles, there is a book that you can read about that. I think it's just called Attachment Styles, but it basically goes into anxious attachment, secure attachment, and then the other one, which I can't remember, begins with A. Is it avoidant? I think so. But yeah, how we connect with people and how we relate to people. If there's a part of you that fears being abandoned or fears rejection, you will anxiously form these bonds with people. So a lack of self-love or a lack of self-worth obviously are not the sole causes of anxiety, but they can significantly influence how you perceive and respond to various situations. When you have self-love and you have self-compassion and you work on building like a really good positive self-image, you can reduce anxiety by fostering a sense of inner security and confidence. Again, this is why self-love is a superpower, because it really links into, I'm just taking my hoodie off because it's so hot. It really links into multiple different things and allows you to show up in just some incredible ways in your life. Because when you're triggered in certain situations, you don't fall back into that thing of, I'm not good enough, there's a threat, I'm going to be rejected, I'm going to be judged. Even those things, even a lack of caring about people judging you, that's a huge amount of space that you now have. Space in your mind, space in your energetic field, emotional space within your body, because you don't fear the fact that people are going to judge you. So even just that, even releasing that amount of just stagnant anxiety and care and worry, it's fucking huge. So now I want to go into a little bit around how you can manage anxiety. I'm going to do some practical tips, and then I actually want to go into how somatic work can help you, linking things back to somatic work. So some techniques for managing anxiety: deep breathing exercises. Again, deep breathing is really good for regulating the body's stress response. It can be really, really good to do the box breathing. So where you breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4, again, breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4. And as you do that, what you imagine is corners of a box. Imagine that you're going from corner to corner with the breath, and you just focus on that. And you just keep breathing until you feel your body start to drop down into that amber zone. Some other things that you can do for regulating nervous system and getting you back into the green zone. I think I touched on this in my nervous system episode, so watch that, listen to that, because that's a really good episode where I go into how you can start to regulate your nervous system. Breathing is a really, really good one for that. Getting with your breath, coming out of the mind, presence on your breath, and using that as an anchor to control your anxiety. Mindfulness and grounding techniques. So again, mindfulness can be focusing on the present moment, which your breath helps you do. Using sensory anchors. So, some people have bobbles on their wrists, some people spin their rings, some people will have like stress relief toys and things that they play with. So if you are a person that finds sensory stuff beneficial, get something that you can use to help you be mindful and ground when you're feeling anxious. Engaging in body scans, but again, sometimes if your anxiety feels really present in your body, this might be a little bit uncomfortable. But a body scan I discussed in the somatic episode is just where you scan from head to toe and you just bring awareness to different points of your body. Grounding your feet in nature is another really good one. So taking your shoes off, going outside, standing in the earth, so grass or soil. So if you can do that when you feel your anxiety coming on, that's another really good technique. Some self-care practices are good. So, journaling, walks in nature, certain things that you like to do, hobbies, relaxing things that really help you just be present with yourself. So a bubble bath maybe, or like we just said, walks in nature. Things when I feel anxious that help me are like, one of my favourite rituals is going to get a coffee from Starbucks and then going on a walk. That's my favourite thing to do. That really, really grounds me. Not having any distractions and just being present with nature. That's something that really, really helps me. Challenging negative thoughts. So those cognitive distortions that come through in the story. So essentially what that means is those negative, narrative stories that play out in your mind, they contribute to anxiety a lot. So what you can actually do is identify and challenge negative thoughts, reframe, consider alternative perspectives, positive affirmations. But for me, I'm not a huge advocate of positive affirmations. I mean, they help. However, if you're not, the struggle with me is like, because I'm very much aware of affirmations you needing to feel them in your body. If you're disconnected from your body, it's almost like you may not feel them in your body, therefore they may not have an impact. But again, just try what works for you and what feels good for you. Because positive affirmations for some people might work. However, it's almost like if someone's having a anxiety, a good affirmation actually for if you're in an anxiety attack is, I am safe and I am in control. And just repeating that over and over again. One of the girls in the retreat actually had anxiety attacks regularly before she came to the retreat. And on the last night before we flew home, so the retreat had finished, she actually had an anxiety attack. And usually at home what would happen is she'd have to go to her brother's and calm down in her brother's. She was never able to control those anxiety attacks. This was honestly incredible to witness on the retreat. Like, it was fucking outstanding how she was able to be there for herself. So, and she won't mind me sharing this because she spoke about it on a Facebook Live that we done. And she also has sent me a video, voice note testimonial talking about it. So anyway, she could never control them. And on the last night she had one. And it was full blown, like level 10. And obviously we were in Greece, and she was like, I need to go home. I'm going to end up in the hospital, like really, really severe. And there was me and 2 other girls helping her. And she was in the bedroom and she was doing the box breathing, and she just kept repeating over and over, I am safe and I am in control. And she had crystals in her hand that she was just playing with. And she kept her eyes closed and she kept saying, I am safe and I am in control. And I just kept asking her what number she was at. And you saw over time, I mean, she was doing it for quite some time, but she went from like level 10 to feeling like she couldn't manage it on her own. And this was the first time she'd ever been able to get herself out of it. I'm pretty certain she'd never been able to get herself out of it before. And she dropped down, and you see her gradually go from like a 6 to like a 3 to like a 2. And the next day she was like, oh my God, like I got myself out of it. And I was like, yeah, you done it. And it's just using certain things that work for you, that feel good for you. So if that affirmation helps, holding something in your hand and doing the box breathing at the same time, try these different things and merge these different things together as a strategy to help you manage your anxiety. So again, reframing and considering alternative perspectives. Reframing is essentially where you have a thought and you just work to like rewrite or reframe it. So it's not black and white, that this or that. You look at alternative perspectives and you look at alternative solutions. When in therapy or in sessions with clients, if they have something that comes up, a belief, we will work to challenge that narrative, and that is reframing the perspective. So it's my role, I believe, as the therapist, to almost ask certain questions to just unravel that belief, and we can start to reframe it. So instead of it being this, which feels super anxiety inducing, really negative, really critical, really heavy, how can we unravel it so it actually feels like there's some level of control, it feels a little bit lighter, it's a different perspective. So that's a tool that can be really, really helpful. And then just lastly, I'm just going to go through some ways that somatic work helps. So somatic work, which is the body work. So again, in the episodes where I was talking about somatic work for self-love, I actually went into the offer that I have. I have now the sacred self-love sessions where I'm going to be bringing women into space. We're going to be doing a blend of somatic and cognitive work. We're going to be using all of these different techniques such as smells, music, lighting, touch, obviously consensual touch, touch to almost move the energy through the body, to just work with the body, and then also bringing some cognitive processing in. So for me, somatic work is huge in the direction I'm going to be taking it. So if you do like the sound of one of those sessions, please drop me a DM and we can discuss it. So body and mind connection. So I spoke about this, but essentially somatic work emphasizes that connection, and it recognizes that anxiety is not solely a cognitive or emotional experience, but also has physical manifestations. So by bringing attention to your body sensation, somatic works helps you become more attuned to the physiological responses associated with anxiety. So muscle tension, shallow breathing, racing heart. So when you notice those in your body, what you're actually doing is giving yourself the opportunity to drop in and start to work through those things. So that's where body scans are really, really powerful, because your body holds on to a lot of tension when it's anxious. So even just if you were present with me and I noticed that in you, I would take you through a body scan and ask you to release the tension from all of your muscles. And what you're essentially doing is you're releasing those pockets of anxiety. The shallow breathing, again, if I notice that, I'd ask you to start to deepen your breaths. All of these things are when you're really working through those physiological responses to anxiety. I spoke about regulating the nervous system. You know, anxiety is often linked to an activated or dysregulated nervous system. Again, when it's activated, it could fly up into that amber or red zone. Let's say you're driving a car and someone pulls out in front of you and you brake and you feel a little bit shaky. That's when your nervous system is activated. However, it can drop back down into the green zone. And a regulated nervous system is when you have the ability to go through those fluctuations that life brings, but then you're able to drop that back down into that green zone and regulate. Dysregulated is when you're operating in like amber red, and then anything else that spikes your nervous system or activates it, you're unable to drop back down. So you're always in that like hypervigilant, hyper aware state within your nervous system. So yeah, regulation. So you drop back more into relaxed and a balanced state, which just promotes a sense of calmness. Release of stored tension. Anxiety can lead to an accumulation of tension and stress in the body. Again, when we do somatic work, essentially what you're doing is you're getting into the body and you're releasing that tension and that energy within the body. If you think about your emotions and if you think about that anxiety as like a spike, so imagine when you're anxious, your body, imagine you're filled with like an amber colour. How do you release that amber colour? Imagine you have a blocked drain. If you don't turn that valve to release the pressure, what do you think is going to happen? It's just going to build up and continue to stay blocked. So emotions are essentially just energetic charges within the body. And if we don't release that energetic charge, it gets stored within the body. So when you do somatic work, you actually are able to release all of these emotions in your body. Rage, anger, grief, crying, having a rage release, moving, getting even simple things like yoga and stretching. You would not realize how much energy you hold on to, stored energy in like your hips and your body and just all like your back and your shoulders, all of these different places. So when you do the somatic work, what you really do is give your body a sense of ease, and you connect into your body and you just release that stagnant energy. Body-based grounding is something that really, really helps pull you out of this worrying about the future and being in this state of like overthinking. So the somatic work encourages you to ground into the present. Again, you can see this if you lie down and you focus on points of contact to the earth, sensory things that happen or that are around you. Again, this is another reason why in the sacred self-love sessions, I am including all of these different things, because all of these different things create elements of safety in different sensory ways for you. Music is creating sensory safety and grounding you. Certain smells are grounding you. Certain things that I have in the room will be grounding you. So essentially when you walk into that room, you're being held in this really, really intentional, safe grounding space. And I'm not just focusing on talk, and I'm not just focusing on one or two ways to make you feel safe. I'm literally creating like this bubble that will give you sensory stimulation to help you feel more grounded. Trauma resolution is another thing that we've spoken about. And yeah, it's just really, really amazing how somatic work can help you with anxiety. It's amazing. And how self-love is crucial for anxiety. So I hope that was more like a different episode, and it was a little bit long. It was like an hour, but I really feel like I've not heard this approach to anxiety before. I mean, I don't listen to many podcasts on anxiety, so maybe there has been. So if you found this beneficial and you know somebody that struggles with anxiety, please send them this episode, because I just almost feel like a lot of people talk about anxiety as like more of a clinical way, or like talking about personal experiences with it. So I hope that was like a mix of both, and just give a little bit of a different perspective, and, you know, linking it to self-love again, linking it to the ways that self-love is a superpower that we all should have. It's absolutely amazing. So yes, please send me a review if you enjoyed that episode. Leave a review on Spotify or Apple. It would mean the world. And just send me some feedback about this episode. I would absolutely love it. Share it with your audience. Tag me. Let's get the episodes out to as many people as we can. So if you would be interested in working with me, then please send me a DM or an email. My email is in the show notes. And yeah, we can get some somatic self-love sessions booked in, some psychotherapy sessions. I actually offer a 3-month package now where you can do bi-weekly psychotherapy sessions with the somatic self-love work sessions. So we're really getting that beautiful blend of the body and the mind together. And it's just such a beautiful way that I've come up with of working with trauma and self-love and body image and all of these gorgeous things. So on that note, I am going to go. I hope you've had a lovely day, whatever you're doing. Thank you for sticking around for the hour, and I shall see you next week for another amazing episode.